French, so hopefully you'll understand what I'm saying, and I'll do my best to make myself understood. So again, yeah, thank you for coming tonight. It's always great to see a room full of people coming, obviously for the food, but also I hope for the wines. The story of Glenelly, as Roger said, is quite a new one. Actually, it's an old estate, dates back to the 18th century, like a lot of South African estates. I'll probably be telling you a little bit about the South African wine industry in a minute, but old estate, but very recently bought by my family in 2003, so that's 13 years ago. Bought by my grandmother, who in the very small world of wine is quite well known. She has run a very famous chateau in Bordeaux called Pichon-la-Lande. That's the short name. The long name is Château Pichon-Longueville Comtesse de la Lande in Pauillac, right next to Château Latour. A chateau she inherited from her father in the late 70s. And she was born in a family of négociants and then chateau owners involved in the wine business in Bordeaux for about just over 200 years. She inherited Pichon at the age of 55 after having lived the career of a military wife. My grandfather was a general in the French army, and she followed him in many different places where he was sent. And at 55 she inherited Pichon, and she took it from what it was a great chateau already, but she took it to the next level, and it was then known as a super second of Bordeaux, really almost on par on quality with the first growth of Bordeaux, which you know, Lafite, Margaux, Latour, Mouton, and Brion. At the age of 78, as you do when you're my grandmother, she decided she wanted to make wine outside of France. Actually, it's not true. She had wanted to make wine outside of France. She spoke with many people in the United States and various places, but she really spotted in South Africa a great opportunity to make fantastic wines. And so she set about in the early 2000s to visit many estates, see what was there on the market, what she could buy. A lot of the big names were actually on the market for sale at the time. But either the varietals which were planted were not the right ones, or there was virus in the vines, so she would have had to pull them, and so it wasn't great. So she found Glenelly, which at the time wasn't a fruit farm. It was a fruit farm, sorry, it wasn't a vineyard. Planted only in plums, but really ideally located in Stellenbosch, right next to one of the famous estates of Stellenbosch called Rustenburg, which I'm sure you've heard of, or seen, quite widely available here in the UK. But so it's a bit like finding a strawberry field next to Chateau Latour. You know, it's like fantastic terroir, but not planted in vines. So she started from scratch at Glenelly in 2003. We pulled out all the fruit trees, did very extensive soil analysis, and planted 60 hectares of vines. Of course, our main focus is red wines and Bordeaux varietals, coming from Bordeaux, but also where we planted the vines in Stellenbosch. That's where, you know, Cabernet is king, really. So we planted all 4 red Bordeaux varietals, a little bit of Syrah, and some Chardonnay. We didn't stop there. We built probably one of the most modern cellars in South Africa, which works on the gravity flow principle, which is basically built on 4 different levels, and all the wines are gravity fed from the top, which is the tank rooms, to the barrel rooms, then to our bottling line. The idea is to make the wine as natural as possible, to pump them as little as possible. So very modern technology, but in an environment where wine has been made since the middle of the 17th century. So that's just the background to Glenelly. I just don't want this to be too much of a lecture. I'll be going around the tables later so we can exchange and if you have questions. So I'll talk about the first 2 wines you have in your. You actually have one wine, yeah? Well, I'll be talking about the first 2 wines, yeah. So we planted 5 hectares of Chardonnay at Glenelly. As I was telling you, where we are in Stellenbosch is mainly for red varietals. But we planted Chardonnay in a slightly different spot, on a slightly different soil type than the reds. It's the coolest spot in the vineyard, which enables us to make wines with natural acidity. Acidity is very important in wine. And also on the soil type, which is alluvial soil with a high content in quartz. Quartz also brings minerality to the wine, and in Chardonnay we think it's very important. So the first wine you've had today is the unoaked Chardonnay. Unoaked means no barrels, just stainless steel vats. And there's a little twist to this wine. We leave the wine on its, I don't want to get too technical, but just a few little informations. We leave the wine on its lees in the tank for about 10 months. And this picks up a little bit of yeastiness, which you can pick up on the nose. And also in the middle of the palate, it brings a little bit more texture. An oak Chardonnay can be quite lean, and this isn't. And sometimes people even tell me, are you sure this hasn't seen any oak? And it hasn't. So it's an oak Chardonnay. I think great summer wine, great aperitif wine. I think we showed pretty well tonight. And for those who don't like oak, I think it's a really good alternative. Sadly, oak has been a little bit overdone the past 10, 15 years, and I think this is on the other side of the spectrum. The second wine you'll be having is a barrel fermented Chardonnay. So if you can, keep a little bit of this wine in your glass, and then you can compare. I think it's a very interesting exercise from slightly older vines. But the main difference is that it's seen some oak, so not too much, so larger barrels and only 30% new. And you'll see the second wine is a lightly oaked style of Chardonnay, quite reminiscent of French style Burgundy. Definitely not a New World Chard. So that's the first two wines. I'll just say a very quick history about South African wine industry. I'm sure most of you know about it, but just for those of you who don't, South Africa has been making wine since as I was saying, 1659. They can actually date the first vintage. As you know, South Africa was a harbor, not a colony, but it was a pit stop for the boats of the East India Dutch Company on their way to Indonesia, or as it was called then, Batavia, for them to get supplies in fresh fruit, meat, and wine. So as soon as the Dutch arrived, they started planting vines. They were then helped by the fact that the French Huguenots arrived. The French Huguenots were the French Protestants who were persecuted in France, and under Louis XIV in 1685, I think, they were kicked out of France. They were mostly very hardworking people, very intelligent, and they were a great loss to France, but for the countries where they went, they brought a lot of skills. And in South Africa, they came with their vines. So there's already a very strong connection between France and South Africa in its history. Today, a lot of the South Africans have French names. You always hear of Joubert, de Villiers, all these very common French names, and they all descend from the Huguenots. Now we fast forward to the 20th century. South Africa was closed, literally closed for business right up until the early 90s. Very little South African wine was exported, and what was exported was actually done through a big cooperative called KWV, and it wasn't exactly the best wine that was being exported. Since then, there's been an influx of investors like ourselves, but also the young winemakers have traveled the world, and now they're coming back to South Africa, and they really want to produce world-class wines. And the other very interesting thing is that the South African vineyard is also coming of age. A lot of it was replanted in the mid-90s, so now 20 years later, we're really starting to see really interesting wines. So it's a very interesting and exciting time for us to be in South Africa. I think really the word is starting to go around. There's really good quality wines coming out of South Africa, and generally very good value for money as well. So I think very interesting. That's it. I think they're serving first course, so I think I'd better sit down and let you get on with it. But I'll be speaking a bit later about the red wines. But again, thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the first two wines. The first course. Thank you.